Evaluating our relationships is not a common practice. Most people are looking at their brokerage balances and their online banking and all these things with much more regularity. But if you look at kind of your social universe, the people in your life who give you energy or take away energy that you see frequently or you don't see enough, just taking time to look at that kind of map and saying, man, I love spending time with Joe. I need to make a concerted effort to see more of him. The thing we say all the time is that if a relationship is important to you, it's up to you to take control of it.
And we're back with another episode of It's Never About Money. I'm quite excited to have an international guest, which is becoming a bit of a flavour on this particular podcast. We've got Alex Kirby from Total Family Management, is the CEO of Total Family Management, in fact. And Alex has attended the University of Maryland, Robert H. Smith School of Business, and Canisius College. I hope I got that right. Total Family Management is a company focused on family coaching and helping families through the dynamics and personalities that are in the family to create better cohesion and better family wellness and long-term satisfaction for everybody. That sounds pretty good to me. How are you, Alex?
Good. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Alex, to kick off, I think, we talk about in It's Never About Money how important it is that our money is pointed towards our family and how important family is in having a life well led. And you talk about, and we've talked about this before, this idea of sort of family well-being. Could we perhaps start with unpacking a little bit what family well-being actually means?
Yeah, I don't know if it's specific to families, Joe.
Yeah.
When you think about, I see you got your coffee there. We're on the East Coast, so it's late here. It's like water or beer time here. But when we talk about well-being as a whole, it's really, it's never about money or this idea of wealth, right? To us, wealth is well-being. So when you say you're a wealth manager, some people say that, but they really mean they're a financial manager.
Yep.
They say I'm a wealth manager, but really what they're doing is everything is sort of through the lens of finances. When we say wealth, we mean well-being. And I think we're going to talk about the Jay Hughes ideas of the 5 forms of family capital, but this idea, everyone knows this. There's more to it than money. It's kind of hard to put your finger on it, but I don't think anyone would trade, all their relationships and all the people they care about and everything that is immaterial for all the money in the world. I don't think there's a lot of people that would do that.
Agree. Do you, when this is an interesting kind of business that you've ended up in, I was just wondering as I was thinking about having you on, like, at what point did you determine that there is a market for, helping families become more successful, as defined by, having a greater level of well-being? At what point did it become apparent that there is some sort of a market for that?
Well, definitely in 2019, I was working with some technology executives. I don't know if I shared this story with you or not, but I flew to San Francisco for this meeting. We were going through kind of annual priorities with an executive that we were working with. And he showed up and he was just off his game. And I knew him well. We'd been working with them for a couple of years. And I said, is everything all right? And he said, I'm going through a divorce. And I'm sitting here looking at my priorities for my company. And I don't know what my own priorities are in my life. And of course, on the plane ride back, I'm thinking to myself, I don't actually know my own life priorities either. And then, COVID hits. And I think a lot of people did, use that time to reevaluate, to figure out what's important to them. That may have even been when this podcast was started, or like close or around then.
Yeah, it was.
And so once you start like looking at the idea of just people growing, so much of the resources goes into business, corporate, on that side of their life. Most executives or families we talk to, if you ask someone like, hey, what are your strategic priorities at work? They'll tell you. They do annual performance reviews. They set goals. They know where they're going. And then on the personal side of their life that they arguably most people care much more deeply about, they're not sure. And so it felt to me like, that was happening. And I had a unique background in terms of like people development and technology that would allow us to do this.
So you don't come from a financial background, Alex. You come from.
Yeah, I have a finance degree.
Yeah.
And I did my MBA.
Yeah.
But I don't think I didn't have any of the licenses that you have. I didn't come from wealth management. But at the same time, I was talking to a lot of family offices and wealth managers like yourself who felt like there was more out there on this topic that you're exploring so deeply.
Yeah.
But they weren't really sure how to do it. It was like everyone sort of theoretically was like, yes, there is more to it than money. But how do I do that? And they end up just kind of falling back on money because they understand it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if we could, perhaps have a short period of time actually defining and distilling perhaps the different phases of life that families are in, and perhaps the unique challenges with each one of those phases. I don't know if we can simplify that at all, Alex, into a few of them. But that would be a good starting point, because if we can understand and identify what the challenges are and as they pertain to finances and other areas, then we can potentially have a solution.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to know about us is we just believe every household or individual needs a vision. So for us, vision is purpose, values, and roles. The top roles that you play in your life. I listen to your podcast, so I know you're a very proud uncle.
I am.
It's like where in your roles is uncle versus podcast host versus like someone who's out there in the world, volunteer, whatever. So that's roles. Values is what's really important to you, and then purpose is like that kind of horizon that you're always striving for, but you never really reach. So when we talk about vision and we're going through these family life phases, that's really what we're doing for all these groups of people. It's like if you have a vision, that's a really nice place to start for most individuals and most families. So the first one is obviously like a single adult.
Yep.
This could be someone who's on their own.
Yep.
For the first time. I think for a single adult, they have so much of a blank canvas. It's like you could be anything. You could live anywhere. You could, you like a lot of times they have less obligations and less ties. And so they're sort of like paralyzed by the decision sometimes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
And certainly like in America, who's like very career driven, right? It's like, well, where am I going to make the most money? Where can I, climb the corporate ladder? Like all these things are in the back of your head as a single adult.
So in some ways, for a single adult, without necessarily the accountability that comes with, a partner and kids and things of that nature, sometimes the allure and the appeal of just pedaling the wheel in work and making more money, or perhaps being maybe even not focusing on money, but being focused on our career and the importance of that, ends up taking the predominant amount of our time, potentially.
Yeah. Or you could be focused on like the wrong things.
Yeah.
Or you could kind of be like pursuing something because you think you're supposed to. Like, everyone in my family wants me to be a doctor. And they would all be heartbroken if I left medical school or didn't go to medical school or whatever. And so they have a lot going on. And a lot of times they don't have the partner who balances them, or someone to bounce ideas off of. Or sometimes, like the kid, like as you said, kids can tie you down in a good way in terms of limiting some of those choices. But I think for that single adult group, it's like they could be just a little bit alone, and trying to think about that stuff. The next is committed partnerships. So these are people who are together but don't have any kids.
No.
And then I think, mostly for the first time there, it's like you're bringing this other person into your life and you're trying to mesh everything together. So it's not, it's like a merger at any company, right? There's like two cultures coming in.
Yep.
And you start to learn things like, oh, that's how you load the dishwasher, and this is what we do at holidays. And so you're kind of combining cultures.
Yeah. I mean, even at that level, Alex, isn't it? It's so, I mean, it's just the second phase, right? With committed partnership, and it is so complex in and of itself. Two completely disparate biologies and past histories coming together and trying to make things work in and of itself have such complexity, without even thinking about the complexity of potentially running a business with that person as well, or having kids with that person as well, and all of those things. So
yeah. And I think we want individuals to have their own values. We feel like it's really hard for people to talk about values if you don't know what they are. Yes. And so the work of doing the individual values for those folks and letting them combine and saying, oh, like you are, maybe you are prioritizing honesty and I'm prioritizing integrity, but those things aren't that different, in a lot of ways. So those are things that we have in common. And usually if your value systems are too far off from someone, you're probably not going to, spend the rest of your life with them. Like you're going to have some overlap.
Yeah.
Of course, in any of these phases, you could have, you can lose parents and you can have tough things happen, whether it be a job loss or losing someone important to you. So those are variables throughout all the phases. The next three are raising young kids, raising adolescent kids, and then launching kids. And the reason that we think about these phases like this is because obviously if you have no kids or you have, 18-year-old kids, you're going to have different things going on in your life. And for those three phases, they do tend, our clients want to talk about their kids a lot. Their kids are a huge topic of conversation. They're very important, raising good people. But the challenges change. And I think with a lot of parenting stuff, it can be isolating too, because you don't always have people to talk about these problems. And then the last one is retirement, basically. Empty nesters, whatever you want to call it. And I think for those people, if you're thinking about it from the lens of a problem, it would be like work's really important to people, or your kids are really important to you. And now the kids are gone and work is potentially gone too. So what do you feel? What's going to fill that bucket? Because a lot of people are retiring and then they live for like 30 more years. So that's a lot of time.
It's like we've spent a lifetime assigning our job, our kids, to our ego and what we are. And then all of a sudden we don't feel that we're needed in that way anymore. And it's very, very a quick sort of dismantling process that needs to occur, which can be kind of a little bit of a crisis, I can imagine.
Yeah, for sure. We say retirement is a goal, not a vision. And I think that there is a lot of confusion for people if they think retirement is that vision. If you're like, well, what do you want to do? They're like, I want to get to retirement. But that is, you're probably going to get to it. You're probably going to retire. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
So then what? Like, how are you going to stay sharp? How are you going to stay active? How are you going to just stay fulfilled as a human being? Is a big question. But if you just think retirement is the vision, you're going to be in trouble when you get there.
Alex, this concept of social fitness, I think there was some sort of Harvard study around this. Could you kind of describe what that is about?
Yeah. So the term social fitness comes from the Harvard study of adult development.
Yep.
It's an 85-year longitudinal study, which means it's following the same participants for their entire life.
Yep.
And there's a book on it called The Good Life, which is an amazing book.
Okay.
We're actually going to do a little like book club podcast as a company with some special guests. So not a competing podcast, Joe, I promise.
No, I'd love to promote it, and I'll definitely put in the show notes a link to that book, and I'm looking forward to reading it myself. So, yep.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And so what they found after 85 years, their main finding was that relationships are important to your long-term health and happiness. They matter a lot. Right?
And there's no surprise, right? Like, this is a great and a timely episode, because I spoke to Dr. Lisa Williams in a previous episode, who was really advocating for it's not a problem if you are if necessarily you're a spendthrift, you like to spend money. It's the types of things that you spend money on that are important. And so the idea of spending money on experiences where you are tied in with other individuals, maybe within your family, actually brings a lot of well-being and meaning in your life, rather than purchase of a particular product, for one of a better, like a car as an example. A car might bring you well-being, but generally speaking, what you're saying makes a lot of sense around experiences.
Yeah, relationships are super important, and it's kind of like easier than ever to be alone, with technology and just sitting in your house, and you can kind of feel connected with people or whatever, but you're not really there. You're not really connected with people. And so social fitness, just like, you would go to the gym every day to stay in shape, that might be, reaching out to people who give you energy and that you care about, picking up the phone and calling them, asking someone to go grab a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
You can't sit around. Social fitness for us is like, you can't sit around and wait for people to ask you to hang out and keep score and be like, well, last time I texted Joe, so now it's his turn to text me. It's like, no, if you care about your relationship with Joe, reach out to Joe and say hello. And we really encourage all of our clients to do that, because these relationships are so important. And especially in the end of life, no one looks back and says like, oh God, I wish I bought more cars. No. Right? They say things like, I wish I was a better friend. I wish I was a better dad. I wish I was a better whatever.
Yeah. So this idea of social fitness, really, as it pertains to family, it kind of seems that, if a family is in a family business, on the detraction of potentially going into something like that, you've got to be really mindful of this social fitness side of things. The idea that the business itself actually takes all the bandwidth that was previously available to ensure that the relationships are harmonious and they're deep and they're connected and they're communicative, where all of a sudden now father and son are just talking about business all the time,
right.
Perhaps even squabbling about different views with respect to business, even husband and wife, or even children competing to try to become the next gen within the business, and forgetting about this sort of aspect of happiness in life around having deep and very communicative relationships to talks to social fitness. What would you say around that? Am I on the right path?
Yeah, definitely. I think I would just say that, you don't want to lose in whatever family business you're in, whether it's like with your partner or spouse or with your kids. I don't think anyone would have entered into this agreement if they knew they were going to lose the relationship in the process, right? So not losing the fact that like you are still siblings, you are still partners, you are still, mother and son or whatever, and making sure that you carve out time to like do some of that stuff. But it's not easy, because you know how quickly these lines blur.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm fascinated, Alex, to go into this area. So we've talked about the connection of meaning and money, and often, rightly or wrongly, I've been really cautious in suggesting that, we want to concentrate on family, and when we concentrate on money solely, sometimes we have these side effects, these kind of, perhaps we're spending so much time in our career that we've actually neglected our family and the importance of it, right? And it's a major pillar. But what's interesting is that, flipping it on its head, you could look at the creation of financial resources as giving you the capacity and the ability to invest back into the family. And that's something that I have not necessarily been a focus of mine, but it's super interesting. So we talk about this 5 forms of capital that you've made me aware of, and I'd like to delve into that with you, if possible.
Yeah, definitely. So the 5 forms of family capital is an idea developed by Jay Hughes. He started talking about it in the late 90s. Most of this work is done at the ultra high net worth level and done in a way that's not super scalable. So a lot of the folks that are supporting, families with billions of dollars are not really worried about a solution that pertains to hundreds of thousands or millions of people. They work very directly with these, smaller families. And Jay was really the person who said, wealth is well-being. That's it. And there's a couple different movements going on, like this Wealth 3.0 idea. I don't think we had a chance to speak about this, Joe. Yeah. But Wealth 3.0 is pretty darn close to wealth is well-being.
Yes.
And so like the 5 capitals as Jay defined them are financial, which everyone you're an expert in that particular one. Human, which is the physical and mental health of the family. Social, which is the relationships. Cultural, which is kind of how we do things around here, the culture of the family. And then intellectual, which is the shared and collective knowledge of the family.
So I'd like to maybe have a little bit of a deep dive into some of them. I think the financial one we can probably put aside just by the nature of my area.
I don't know anything about it, honestly. So I would I would defer to you on that.
Yeah. And there's plenty of financial planning podcasts that do that. I really wanted to do something different with this one. So let's actually delve into the other forms of capital. You pick one.
All right. Well, something that I thought was interesting because I listened to the podcast that you had with who's the gentleman also from the States, Travis.
Travis Shelton.
Yes, Travis Shelton. Thank you. Yep. I sorry, Travis, for getting your name off the top of my head. But you talked about obviously, if you don't know where your next meal is coming from.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Then money does matter a lot.
Of course.
Right.
Yep.
So I think the thing that's interesting, probably for a lot of your audience, and certainly with the people that we work with, is if you have a financial advisor, for the most part, you're not you know where your next meal is coming from.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
And so to me, that feels like it's a shame if we don't take the time to reflect and use some of this time and some of these resources in the way that you and I are talking about. Yeah. Because if we were in that other situation, we wouldn't have a choice. Right.
Yes.
So let's start with human capital, which is the physical and mental well-being of the family. That is very, very important to everyone. And if you're going to be the way to invest in it, so we're always taking money from the financial bucket and putting it into these other forms of capital. I think we wanted to give actionable investments that your listeners and people could make, right?
Yeah. So are we talking about, on this is a physical health and mental health aspects of things with respect to the family? So an investment of time in education into how important sort of exercise programs are. The investment of time into, personal development and making sure that we're all, anxiety free, depression free as much as we possibly can. Those types of aspects of things.
Yeah. So if I think for health, the mental and physical health of the family, the investments you want to make are preventative.
Yes.
Right. Like you want to do stuff now so that you don't worry about it 20 or 30 years down the road.
Yeah.
And you very astutely said it isn't always just money. Most of the time it's time.
Yeah.
So for example, in this particular category, you could go on a hike.
Yes.
You could go on a hike with your family, go on a hike by yourself. That is a time investment. Like a good walk outside for a couple hours is a beautiful way to spend some time. It costs you almost nothing to do it. But if you do that for 30 years, you go on a 2-hour walk, once a week for 30 years, you're going to be in a really good place. it's probably going to help heart health and just how you feel about everything. And so physical and mental health, I think in particular, is one that is like keenly preventative. And,
And I
and
love,
instead of, yeah, go ahead, Joe.
I just love that, you could potentially get win-wins across the forms of capital, in the sense that you could invest the time in walking, but you could do that with your partner, which plays into the
Yep,
social side of things.
that's
And
right.
it also plays into a longer term idea of physical and mental well-being as well. Because if you're developing relationships by doing exercise with others as well, those relationships become really important as we age, and having communities around us. So like there's all of this stuff kind of, it feels to me that if you actually strategically minded about it, you can get some very big win-wins across many of the dimensions.
Yeah. And just like, I think the shift for a lot of people is moving from cost to investment. If you're like, oh, that gym membership's really expensive. If you think about it as an investment in your health, or therapy is really expensive. If you think about it as an investment in your mental health, then that's a different way to sort of frame the money decision in front of
Yep.
you,
Yep.
so that you're not like, just so worried about the cost. Because fast forward like 20 years, if you were out of shape and in pain and, not feeling good, you would definitely go back and invest in the gym.
For sure.
Right.
For sure. Yep.
So should we do the next one called,
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah.
social?
Yeah. Social. Amazing.
This one was because you went on a trip, right? When we were talking about this.
I'm particularly interested in this one. I just mentioned the Lisa Williams episode as well, around it's really been a big thing for me, where, I previously traveled a fair bit solo, which I've quite enjoyed, and I do quite well. Some people struggle with it. I don't. But what's interesting is that this time around, last Christmas, I thought to myself, I've previously gone to Bali by myself, but perhaps this time I could actually suggest my family come around with us, and we go, and actually spend some time together. And it was one of the most enjoyable experiences I've had traveling, because just having, my mum there, and, my brother and my nephews and my niece, just, it was, and for them to see this new country, was just really incredible. And I think spending our investing in these things are just so important connection points for us. And so social absolutely makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think whatever you can do to strengthen the relationships. In the Harvard study book, The Good Life, they say that relationships are like muscles. You have to put time and effort into getting them stronger, and if you don't use them, then they get really weak. So if you see a friend that you haven't talked to in 10 years, right? That relationship isn't where it was when they were maybe your best friend like a decade ago, right? Because it's grown weak over time. Or if you meet a new friend or someone new in your life, and you start spending more time with them, and you start like being a little more vulnerable, or you start getting to know them on a deeper level, that relationship is getting stronger. So for the investments here, for us, again, going on a walk with your family is a very, cost-effective way to invest in that relationship. You can go on family vacations. We've seen families starting to budget this way, to say how are we investing in the social capital of our family this year? Let's set aside a little bit of money, whatever we can afford. Doesn't matter if it's a road trip, or you do want to go someplace nice, or you just want to like go on a picnic as a family. It's a way to invest in the relationships. And if you don't do it, they are going to grow weaker. And then on the family business side, it's like, yeah, if you struggle to communicate at Thanksgiving or Christmas, you're going to struggle to communicate in the boardroom too. So let's find ways to just like, connect on a deeper level and make sure those relationships are strong.
And it's such a shame, and also a reality, that it takes sometimes sickness and losing someone close to us to realize how darn important it is to do these things. I mean, I'm completely mindful since the loss of my late father that, I want to spend time. And, my mum's very well and she's great. But, I want to spend time with her as much as I can as well. And she'll have to tolerate me a little bit on that. But,
Yeah.
and I note that, for you, you're actually on vacation right now with your family.
Yeah. Yeah. We were in Florida for St. Patrick's Day. We did we had my kids and my wife and a bunch of friends down there. And one of the things is always in the back of my head as kind of weird as it is, it's like, I don't know how many St. Patrick's Days I have left with my in-laws. They're in great health and they're wonderful people and all that. But I was able to see my dad's sister, who just celebrated I'm not going to say the birthday, but a very serious milestone birthday. Great. And so it's great to see those people and spend time there, and you just never know. And one day when it's gone and it's not an option, it's something that I think a lot of people will regret.
And I think we share the scenario of losing someone that's close to us, and then really having an introspection and a reflective time on what's important. And that's been the case for you. I know you've got a deeply personal situation as well.
Yeah. I lost my brother about a year ago. This time, about a year ago, and it's been certainly when you look at the relationships that you have in your life, and you're like, I wish that was better. I wish I had put more time into it. I wish I had reached out. All the data on these relationships is that people, on the regret front, people regret not reaching out. Very rarely do people regret reaching out and apologizing and saying, hey, I actually miss having you in my life. You don't hear regret from that. You hear regret about not making that phone call.
Yeah, 100%.
So cultural capital.
Yes, cultural. What's that about?
Well, just the kind of the culture of a company.
Yeah.
Right? When you think about the culture of a company, it's a little hard to pin down. But we always say how we do things around here. And so certainly the work we do at TFM, helping families, companies, large groups of people uncover their vision. Your vision is part of your culture. Really great companies like Canva, one of my favorite Australian exports, leads with their purpose and their values and how they treat their people. And I think families can do a lot more of that.
Why do you think it's difficult? Why do you think it's difficult for families to do that? Do you think, I see a lot of companies, really spending a lot of time on their values, maybe partly because they need to actually distill them. Whereas with families, they might have an innate understanding of what their values are. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe because there's financial reasons to have a great culture and values set in a business context, but in a family context, what's the outcome of great culture?
Sure. Yeah. I know that there's no such thing as no culture.
Yeah, sure.
Right. You can't have, your family can't have no culture, whether you've spoken about it or whether you've actually written it down. That's one thing, but there's no such thing as no culture, right? If you've seen another family, whether good or bad, right? Maybe you've seen someone in your life be rude to a waiter or a waitress, right? This is I don't even think I've ever told this story, but I went on this date with this girl when I was in my 20s. And we were out at it's not my wife, but we went out to a Valentine's Day dinner.
Yeah.
And she snapped her fingers at the server. And I was like, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm getting this person's attention. I'm like, that's not how you get anyone's attention. And she's like, that's what my dad does.
Oh, wow.
So there's things that are sometimes, negative like that, or, being a really generous tipper or the way that you do something as a group of people. We always go to church. We always donate our time to this service organization. We always, collectively read as a group. We read a lot of the same books. I think investing in your culture is really important because there is no such thing as no culture. And so why I think families struggle with it might just be that it's hard to pin down.
Yes.
And when we say vision, like the reason we break down vision the way we do is it's like you don't have to totally define culture just as vision, but it's a great place to start. It's a great place that anyone can start. Figure out your purpose statement, figure out your values, and figure out your top roles. And that's going to help you in figuring out what your culture is.
I also wonder whether, when you talk about we do it this way or we don't do it that way, whether that is really parent-led or one of the parents leading with that. And so there's almost an enforcement of that across the board. And what I wonder is whether, the families that do it better are actually collaborating more with their kids to get them invested and in the rules, so to speak, of what the family does, and whether that works better than that sort of autocratic, totalitarian kind of this is the way we do things.
Sure.
What's your view on that? Because, businesses can be the same, right? Like business leaders can be like, this is the way we're doing it, and I don't care what you think. That's the way we're doing it. Or what do you guys think? This is the way I think. This is what I think about like the way we're going to interface with the world. What are your thoughts?
I would say that authenticity is really like the personal kind of like checkpoint for all of those questions. So if you think about the companies that are inauthentic, right? They have their values, and everyone walks in and looks at them and they're like, these are just random words that, corporate selected or whatever, right? Like these don't mean anything. Versus you see great companies like the Patagonias of the world, right? Who you see their values and you're like, oh man, I feel that in everything that they do. So I think for families, it's kind of the same thing. Is like, you can say all these things if you're a parent or a leader of your family or trying to do it. You're like, well, we really care about da, 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 da. But at the end of the day, what you're doing, how you're living, and if you're showing kids, like they see if you work hard, right? You can say, well, hard work's really important in our family. But if you don't work hard, then your kids are not going to buy into that.
No, that's true.
I can't tell you how many families we've seen, multi-gen families, where the rising gen has said, oh, we learned hard work from our parents. I saw my mom do this. I saw my dad do this. The parents never sort of said like, we need to work hard and that's part of our culture and our culture is hard work. No. They just saw it every single day for a really long period of time.
Is that why families, and maybe that's part of the reason why values are not necessarily explicitly written. It's ingrained in the way, it's a culture, right? It's ingrained in the way they do things, in the way they act, rather than this culture at the moment where everything needs to be explicitly said. And sometimes it's explicitly said, but there's no action behind it.
Yeah. I think for values in particular, like it's really healthy to have them defined.
Okay.
For your values, we always say you can put them up in your kitchen or in your front door, and people should walk into your house and say like, yeah, it looks about right for Joe. Like it's not something you need to shy away from. No. It's something that you should wear proudly. But the reason that it's helpful to define them is because you're not for every decision, not like what am I going to eat for dinner tonight, but for big decisions, your values can help you. If you're unsure about, do I want to launch a podcast? Do I want to create a new business? Do I want to sell my business? For the really big decisions, your values are a nice framework to look at and say like, do my values vibe with what I'm about to do right now? And sometimes if your gut feels like it's the wrong decision, a lot of times it's going against one of your core values.
And I suppose there'd be unequal understanding within families of what the actual values are. Everyone's going to have a different take. So actually collaborating with each other and communicating with each other to distill this more precisely and come to a consensus agreement is actually really useful to make strong decisions that are for the benefit of the well-being of the family as a total.
Yeah, absolutely. You get to decide your own values.
Yep.
You don't get to decide anyone else's. You don't get to decide your kids' values. You don't get to decide your partner's values. But having your own individual values determined, when you come together with your partner and now you have to make decisions about things like raising kids, or you're coming together with your siblings and you have to make decisions about how we're going to run this business, each of those other people understanding what the other person's value structure is, and instead of it being, negative, like, Joe, you're thinking about this the wrong way. It's like, oh, Joe, I see you prioritize loyalty. So I understand why you're thinking about this in this way with this long-term vendor or partner that we've had, right? Like, you really care about loyalty. That's not as important to me. But now we can have a discussion about it without it being adversarial.
Yeah, makes sense. So we talked about cultural. Is there any other form of capital that?
The final one is mental models. The final one is intellectual.
Intellectual,
but
sure.
Yeah, but we think about it like mental models, like collective knowledge of the family. So what does your family know, and how do you make decisions as a group based on some of all, those things that you know? And some of these could be like not trivial, but there's family recipes, right? Like the best burger or meat pie or whatever, what have you, the sauce, like the sauce for the chicken parm, right? That's collective family knowledge that gets passed down through the generations about, like, this is how we make chicken parm over here. Or if you're a family that hunts or fishes or surfs or builds houses, these are kind of like trade examples of collective knowledge. But I think about mental models for families in terms of, how did you make really big decisions in your life? And how can we use the lessons, the mistakes, the things that we know about the world to help the people that are there with us now and that are going to come after us? Because this after living some life, right? You know something about love or success or leadership or whatever, and figuring out ways that we can all share this, like, with each other as a collective family, ultimately makes the family more powerful as a group.
Mm-hmm. I love this one. And as you were talking about it, I thought back to an episode I had with Matt Heiner from Net Wealth Investments down here in Australia. And his family's from originally from a sort of a steel importing family originally, and they've had various iterations of businesses over many, many years. And Matt was kind of describing it's not the wealth that's necessarily passed down that makes the difference. It's the ability to create the wealth in terms of the intellectual IP and the education that's passed from one generation to another. Because as we know, like, the more that a family branches out, the wealth cannot just be spread across more and more people. There needs to be new ideas generated and wealth created. And so he really described that process of, well, when, a person in our family is born, they go through a process of education around entrepreneurship and all of that sort of thing. And I thought, wow, that's super interesting. So as an example, the Stefan family, we're in the business of, having a financial planning practice, and we understand business ourselves is something that we can, potentially pass on to future generations. So I completely resonate and understand this idea. It's great.
Yeah. And, like, the investments, again, don't have to be large monetary investments. If you're thinking about, something in this area that is easy to do, having a journal is a very simple way to do it, right? Because you can go back to key points in your life and be like, how did I decide to, which college or university I was going to go into? How did I decide which line of business I was going to go into? How did I all these things? The people that come after us want to know these things. Like, they look back, they're going to be looking up to Uncle Joe. I think we talked about this example specifically. It's like, how did you decide to start the podcast? Because I'm not, talking like as maybe your niece one day. She's like, I'm thinking about this creative endeavor I want to do.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's right for me, and I'm really scared, and I'm not sure. How did that work for you? And what lessons did you learn? And what did you wish you had done differently? Like, that's kind of how we, like, help each other along. And certainly there's legacy services, and you can do, like, you can get books written, and you can record podcasts and video, and you can put more substantial investment into it. But I think it just starts with like thinking about how you make decisions and maybe writing some stuff down.
Well, I've entirely loved this segment of just chatting about how, yes, we need to, as a very bare bones minimum, as we always talk about, is be able to make sure that we deal with the physical um, aspects of survival, but once we're over and we're grateful to be over and above that sort of level, then we've got the resources to potentially start to consider how we can put back investment back into our family.
Yep.
Rather than this kind of idea of building castles in the sky, this kind of hoarding that goes on. And perhaps because we're not necessarily always aware of all the aspects that we can actually think about that are investments, not costs. And so I think you've done a really great job of actually distilling that for us.
Can I add one more final thing, Joe?
Of course you can.
So financial, human, social, cultural, and intellectual, those are the 5 capitals. So let's take financial out for a second.
Yeah.
I think most families, when they sit down and they're like, all right, okay, they're evaluating themselves on human, social, cultural, intellectual, and they're trying to figure out how they can make investments in these areas. The natural inclination is to focus on what you are missing. You're like, oh, well, we're so bad at this, right? But I would strongly encourage families to focus on what they do well and double down in that area, because you're going to start to get momentum faster. So if it's very natural for you as a family to like strengthen your social relationships and your connection and all that kind of stuff, just double down there for a while.
That's interesting.
And just don't focus that you're like, oh, we're so bad at intellectual capital. Don't focus on that. Focus on what you do well and double down there, and you're just going to see gains much faster.
So I imagine that the things that you do well, but also the things that you're not doing enough of, is the low-hanging fruit.
For sure.
Makes
There's
sense.
some stuff. I mean, I don't think there's any mix for families. When you think about the capitals, I don't think it's 25, all the way around the non-financials.
No.
For some families, families get to decide. If you go through this exercise as a family or as a company, you get to decide. You can say, man, social capital is really important to us. And so we're going to put more resources and time into this versus maybe the cultural capital stuff. I don't know. I wasn't really sure what Joe and Alex were saying on that one. So it's going to be smaller in that area, but that's okay. As long as you're thinking about wealth much broader than money and thinking about it as well-being, that's a win for the direction that we're trying to take this industry.
Yeah, I was just thinking as well, the idea of a 4-day working week and all of that sort of, by being more productive, you might be able to take another day off, and how that sort of plays into this idea of, well, I could use that day to actually enhance my social, capital. I could use that maybe for an intellectual capital. I might study, I might do other things. It's quite amazing. I was also just thinking, whether there's something to be learned from families that are in business together, where their businesses are actually flourishing. What are they doing in their businesses that we can learn as families without businesses, and can implement to have a greater level of success in our family? And I think when I say success in family, I mean better well-being for all.
Yeah. I mean, I love looking at any successful business and saying, what are they doing really well? Are you going to ask me the spirit animal question?
I sure will.
Okay. All right. Can we do it now so I can spin it into this question?
Yeah, go for it. Let's do it. I want to change it up.
Okay. My spirit animal is definitely a bear.
Okay.
Bears are very introspective, protective.
Yeah, they are.
They kind of they don't look super athletic sometimes, but they can surprise you with some athleticism. Yes. Very tight family. They love salmon. But I use this as an example because one of the things we've seen families do is we have a Kirby brand of a bear. So we created a family logo around that is a bear. And it, going back a long time ago, it's very common for families to have crests, right? But now, your crest typically is 300 to 400 years old if you have one, and it doesn't totally mean a ton to you.
Yep.
But if you look at what really cool companies are doing on the branding side, you can take some of those ideas and move it to your family
Oh,
and
that's
say,
cool.
like, what symbol can we have as a group? It doesn't have to be like, broadcast ever. It could just be like on our thank you notes, or it could be on a t-shirt, or it could be, on our front door, that will help us remember and symbolize something that's important to us. So that's like taking the idea of a brand that stands for something and moving it to families. In other things are like business practices, where most successful businesses have a pretty good way of looking at talent and development, right? They're like, well, who are the important people in our company, and how are we going to make sure that they are ready for the challenges that lie ahead from them, and how are we going to grow them? That's a question that any family could ask about the members of their family, to say, what does this person need from us? How can we help them grow? How can we give them the resources they need? Because the only difference is you can't really fire your family members typically. But I think there's lots of ideas that are in the business world that if you just like tweak it slightly and you think about your household or your family like a business or a team, you can do a lot of the stuff that we know already works.
Yeah, I think the idea of like even, operationally in a business, the sort of meeting flows and the cadence. Now, we don't have to necessarily have that directly replicated in the families, but
Sure.
I wonder whether having that consistency of having regular family meetings as an example, relating to whatever's going on, maybe at school or at work and all of those types of things is important. Maybe the family dinner table is a kind of, a quasi version of that, but I wonder whether sort of more of a kind of entrenched formalization of it, and a ritualization of it is something that families can think about too.
Yeah, I mean, just revisiting your family vision once a year with, tons of our clients do that. And a lot of times it doesn't change. Sometimes it changes slightly, but it's an opportunity just to like pause all the chaos of just normal everyday life and just say, okay, do we feel good about the direction that we're headed? Putting some of these small practices into place make a huge difference over a long period of time.
Mm-hmm. So I was just thinking as well, like when we connected and you heard the name "It's Never About Money," did you have any thoughts, or do you have any thoughts now about what comes to mind?
I mean, just that, like, I figured we'd see eye to eye on tons of different things.
Yeah.
It's really never about the money, and we're so money obsessed as a culture, and
Yeah.
as our various countries, and certainly in the United States. It's also a lens that just people understand. So it's like you can measure it, you can track it. Um, a lot of patriarchs are very comfortable looking at investments and insurance and like all these certain things. But any book that you read about, whether it's a good life or books about regret, money is just never something that people talk about after they survive the plane crash or in the last moments of their life. It's about the people around them, who they were as a person, and it's moving in this direction. Wealth 3.0. There's a book called Wealth 3.0 by Jim Grubman, and this idea is going to continue to grow. And I think that's the thing that's cool for your listeners and your clients is I would be nervous if I had a wealth advisor who only talked to me about money, because it would be more and more clear to me that they are a financial advisor. And then I don't have support in those other four capitals, or I don't even have someone who's in my corner that's thinking that way.
Yeah, makes sense. So not only is there Wealth 3.0 thinking about all of these things that we've kind of discussed today, but there's also this kind of idea of wealth managers who are actually in that 3.0 space. They actually are also on that same journey. And it's challenging. Sometimes clients are not conditioned to speak to advisors that want to get into, discussion around these other elements that we've traversed today. So
Yeah.
it's super interesting. But I wonder, like, now that you've gone through this process within your business, you're speaking to so many different families. Is there any one thing that you would give as advice to a family about how they can improve their general level of well-being?
I mean, certainly, maybe I'll take the social fitness approach here.
Yes.
Because evaluating our relationships is not a common practice, I would say. Most people are looking at their brokerage balances and their online banking and all these things with much more regularity. But if you look at kind of your social universe, the people in your life who give you energy or take away energy that you see frequently or you don't see enough, just taking time to look at that kind of map and saying, man, I love spending time with Joe. I need to make a concerted effort to see more of him. Or I'm really struggling with this person. I've maybe been hanging on to this relationship too long. I'm not sure it's helping me. I need to actually slowly start to phase that out. So I think the first thing I would say is evaluate your relationships and start to figure out who you want to be around, who are the important relationships in your life, and then be proactive in the outreach. The thing we say all the time is that if a relationship is important to you, it's up to you to take control of it. It's no one else. If your relationship is important to you, it's your responsibility. So just call that person, text that person, and find time to meet up with them. And then the last piece would be, it's never too late. I know that there's people maybe listening to this right now thinking about someone. And they're like, I can't reach out to that person. No, they would hang up on me or whatever, or that wound is too fresh or whatever. But it's really never too late to get these relationships back on track.
Yeah.
There's certainly times where you don't want someone in your life anymore. Mm-hmm. That's a different conversation. But if there's someone who you do want in your life and you just haven't reached out, it's never too late. It's never too late to improve your relationship with your kids, with your siblings, with the people around you. It's just never too late. And by being a little more proactive, you're going to feel good that you just kind of took the step, made the call, etc. So think about your relationships periodically so that you can figure out which ones are important. And then it's never too late. Those would be my two things for your.
That's amazing.
Listeners.
It's a really good place to end. But I just wondered, you already stole kind of my thunder earlier with the kind of bear. I mean, that's not the way we do things around here, Alex. But I was interested.
That's called I violated your culture.
You did, but look, I kind of accepted it. You did ask, but I thought, well, okay, you can at least tell me what subspecies of bear you'd be and why.
I would say, I guess it would be. I'm tempted to go polar bear.
They are kind of cute. Ruthless,
they seem ruthless but cute. But I would say grizzly bear. They're just they're kind of the king of the woods. They get to eat tons of fish. They feel warm all the time. Their kids are really cute. Their bear cubs are really cute. So I go grizzly bear.
Yeah, and they're in a lot of major movies. I remember one of them in The Revenant. So
yeah, right. Yeah, not that grizzly bear. But a different
was shocking. Alex, it's been a really great time. Thank you very much for coming on. I've learnt a lot, and actually, I feel like it's consolidated a lot of the stuff that I've been learning through this podcast. So. Again, really appreciate your time and look forward to catching up with you in the future.
Yeah, thank you.
If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.